Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another of these fascinating lectures that our town historian has been giving. He's been giving one every month. This is the 9th month. He's done a couple of repeats like he's doing now with this hurricane lecture. I think if any of you have been to any of the other lectures by Jim Garman, you know that we have a fascinating history in this town. Let me turn it over to Jim. I just want to say that this guy is, and this is absolutely true. I've been working with this 375th committee for over the past year, really, and I bet I'm the only guy in the state of Rhode Island that's got the town historian on my speed dial. Because seriously, this guy is an integral part of everything we do, and I just think the series of lectures is absolutely great. I should also mention that all of these lectures will be available online, so you can view them at home. You can send people a link to a YouTube video. Rich Zalipski's been filming every one of these things. And please join me in welcoming Jim. I think you'll enjoy this.
Thank you. The topic tonight is, I've modified it just slightly from what was advertised, and that is that this is going to be on the effect of the hurricanes 38 and 54 on Aquidneck Island. I have more Newport pictures than Portsmouth pictures, but nonetheless, just so you're aware of that. Next month, I'm giving a talk on the Gentleman Farms of Portsmouth, which is Glen Farm, Sandy Point, Oakland, and some others that were around. I like to recommend a book to you if you want to read about it beforehand. It just happens to be one that I wrote called The Gentleman Farms of Portsmouth. There's a couple of copies over there. And there's another book over there, The Historic Tales of Newport County, which has quite a few hurricanes. There's a chapter on the hurricanes and a lot of old pictures of that in it. So if you're interested in those, the books are all $20 a piece, and you can see me afterwards. Okay, so the one reference as far as this topic is concerned is this one. It's a book called Sudden Sea, and it was written in 2003 by R.A. Scotty, and it's the best thing I've seen on the 1938 hurricane. It has a lot of human interest stories and so on in it, and it's really an excellent book, so I strongly recommend that. As usual with my PowerPoint presentations, I'm very much indebted to my wife who puts these things together. I give her rough slides, and then she creates the pictures and all the labeling and everything, and it works out really well. We're quite a team doing that. And I can say that she's not even here tonight, but she was here Tuesday. So we're going to get started with this. If you can't see the screen somewhere, why feel free to move the chairs around a little bit. This is what we're going to do. Okay, the impact of the storms of 1938 and 1954 on Aquidneck Island. Okay, and this is what we're doing. First of all, 1938, here are just a couple teaser pictures for you from the 1938 hurricane. One showing Washington Square underwater, and the other showing the surf crashing at Newport Beach. We all know the geography of this area, and we know that both Narragansett Bay and the Sakonnet River are really wide open. And any storm that comes up from the Atlantic Ocean can really do a job on this area, and it did in these two storms. We've had lots of other hurricanes, and I'll talk about a couple of those in a minute. 1954, we have Market Square. The building on the right is the police station, and on the building on the left, rather, is the police station. The building on the right is the carousel at Easton's Beach. Somehow, mysteriously, all the horses from the carousel disappeared overnight, and they were found. Some of them were found in people's cellars a few months and years later. Okay, we've been vulnerable to a lot of hurricanes. We've had a lot of them come through here. We're in a pretty vulnerable position for storms that are coming up the Atlantic coast, and they have to hit land somewhere, and we've been involved in that a lot. And a lot of us remember, certainly in the past year, we had Sandy and we had Hurricane Bob in 1991 and so on. The first one took place right about the time Portsmouth was founded, which was right around 1638 or so. There was a hurricane here, which the governor of Massachusetts blamed on Anne Hutchinson too. It was her fault. Anything that happened in Portsmouth was the Massachusetts governor blamed on her because he had banished her from his colony and really wanted to well, have someone to blame. We didn't use the term hurricane back in the early days of this. They all talked about great gales, and when they were written up in the newspapers and in the magazines and so on, they referred to them as the Great Gale of 1815, the Great Gale of 1869, and so on. And then we had the 38 hurricane and the 44 hurricane. We had 2 hurricanes in 54, and then Bob in 91 and Sandy in 2012. And of course, a lot of others in between. But the 2 I'm talking about tonight are really the worst ones in terms of damage, pretty much in New England and also in Rhode Island. There also was a storm, a really bad storm that took place while the Americans were trying to push the British off Aquidneck Island back in 1778. It was kind of an interesting drama that we had. The Americans had come over from Tiverton across where the stone bridge later was built. It's Rhode Island directions. And others they were trying to work out an arrangement with the French who were on Connecticut Island over on Jamestown. And they were going to come ashore and push the British out of Newport back to wherever they wanted to go. And that military campaign, which was last month's lecture, by the way, it failed. But as part of it, the American troops were lined up around Fort Butts up on top of the hill here and to Lehigh Hill over on the West Main Road. And they were out in their cover there when the storm hit. And they had no protection. They had tent flies, they had blankets, that's about all they had. And the storm raged for about 2.5 days. And a lot of the American militiamen decided it was time to go home and take in the harvest because they didn't really want to stay out in that. And the campaign ultimately failed. The Americans were forced to evacuate the island. They went back across to Tiverton, and the campaign did not succeed, although there was a rather significant battle fought on August 29th, 1778, very close by where we're standing here. I'm standing, you're sitting. Okay, so I'm going to concentrate on these 2 storms, 38 and 54. Hurricane Carol in 54. We just talked about the 38 hurricane. We didn't have names back in those days. And again, some of us have experienced Bob and Sandy and Gloria and a few others. We experienced Hurricane Bob from quite a distance. We were in Colorado that week, and it was fun watching it on the Weather Channel, at least till we got home. And then when we got home, we had to try to climb over branches to get into the house that we got home that night. 75 years ago on Saturday, Hurricane of 38 hit. There should be, I expect there's going to be a lot of publicity on that over the course of the weekend. You'll probably see quite a bit because 75th is a fairly significant date, number of years to sort of commemorate something. Not celebrate, but commemorate. We in Portsmouth, for those of you that don't know, are celebrating our 375th anniversary this year. And we were founded in 1638, and we've had a committee working, as Doug said, over the course of the last a little over a year, I guess it was, working on all this. We've had a lot of fun doing that. Okay, the results of the 38 hurricane were quite disastrous in the local community. Before we started here tonight, I met 2 people at least, 3 people who had experienced the 38 hurricane. So we'll probably get some stories from them too, I hope, over the course of what we're doing. It came as a surprise. It was a relatively nice day. After summer was over, it's right at the time of the beginning of fall, but it started out as a sunny day. It was a nice day, and a lot of people really had no clue about what ultimately was to happen here. We're very much spoiled these days by all the up-to-minute weather analyses that we get on television and on our cell phones and wherever else. There was a weather bureau at that point, but it wasn't obviously anywhere near as efficient as it is today. Obviously, with a lot of electronics and a lot of analysis that goes on today, we have a pretty good idea when a storm's coming at us. But they didn't really know, and they made some misjudgments at this point about this 38 hurricane. As you see on the map here, it had been formed off the coast of Africa, actually on the 9th of September, and that's where they usually come from. It crossed the Atlantic, and it really took its good old time crossing the Atlantic. You can see the dates there, tracking primarily due west and then eventually northwest. But it was a severe storm. By the 20th of September, it had grown into what we call a Category 5 storm, which is the worst. That's the highest category. I have the categories on the next slide. I'll show you what that means. But it was really off the coast of Florida. It was a severe storm, and it was moving. And it was moving very quickly. If you look at that map, you see off the coast of Florida on the 20th, and you see hitting the mainland on the 22nd. That's fast. Okay, the storm categories, they're all right here. We hear this again from the Weather Channel every time we get a storm anywhere close. What becomes a hurricane is 74 miles an hour. And of course, the different categories there of the storm. But Hurricane of 38 was a Category 5 storm when it was off the coast of Florida. There was a high pressure center over Bermuda at that point, which kept the storm from moving out to sea. It stayed along the coast and began to move very quickly. The hurricane itself, and again, the speed of the hurricane over the water, 70 miles an hour. That's flying. That's really fast. That's the highest recorded track of any hurricane ever. Okay. Now, where we are in this particular storm, in the northern hemisphere, the hurricanes rotate counterclockwise. And if you're on the right half of that circle around the eye, you're in what's called the dangerous semicircle. That's the worst, because not only do you have the winds of the hurricane spinning around the center of the storm, but you also have that 70 miles an hour across the ocean. And those combine into a combined wind, which is immeasurable. In a lot of cases in 1938, wind instruments that they had set up to try to determine what the wind was, it went beyond them. It broke them. And it was really, really pretty awful. At 8:30 in the morning, the storm was off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina. Okay? And it moved very quickly, because by 3 o'clock it was here. Okay. And R.A. Scotty in her book, Sudden Sea, says this as a general statement about it. If you can't read it, I'll read it to you. But at 2 o'clock, the swath of the coastline from Cape May in New Jersey to Maine was one of the wealthiest and most populous in the world. By evening, it would be desolate. The great hurricane of 1938 was more than a storm. It was the end of a world, which states it very clearly as to the impact of all this. After it went by Hatteras, it began to turn northeast, and its winds diminished somewhat. It was downgraded to a Category 3 storm, and the expectations were, as we always hope, that the storm would be driven out to sea and end up out around Iceland someplace, or maritime provinces of Canada. But there was an individual by the name of Charles Pierce who worked in the Weather Bureau. He was a relatively new employee of the Weather Bureau, and his judgment at first was he accepted the fact that yes, it's going to go out to sea, but then he did further analysis of the storm and changed his mind. And they had meetings in the Weather Bureau talking about this and so on. What are we going to do about this? And in general, the more senior Weather Bureau people said, don't worry about it. It's going out to sea. And Pierce changed his mind. He said, no, it's going to hit. It's going to hit hard. As late as 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the weather advisories were from the Weather Bureau, no problem. It's going out to sea. At 2:30, it hit Long Island. Think about that. 2 o'clock, even if you're following this on the radio, and we had radio in those days, obviously we didn't have television, and we didn't have the internet, but at a half hour after the Weather Bureau saying no problem, it hit, and it hit really hard. It hit with winds of about 125 miles an hour. Okay. It went 425 miles from Cape Hatteras to Long Island in 7 hours. That is extraordinary. We've never had that. Usually they move along sometimes they move as slow as 10, 15 miles an hour. Usually though, it's about 25 or so that they move. It varies obviously storm to storm, but this was the fastest ever recorded. It did significant damage along the western end of Long Island, particularly close to New York City, that end, and New York City got hit pretty hard as well. It crossed Long Island Sound and came ashore in Connecticut between Bridgeport and New Haven. That was the eye of the storm. And again, what that does, with the eye being in that area, that puts us in the dangerous semicircle, which is very problematic. In addition, it struck at high tide and when there was a full moon. The worst possible combination you could expect. So when it came to Rhode Island, it was a surprise because it had moved so fast. The shore towns of South County along the shore, Charlestown and down in that area, were totally devastated. 400 people approximately, we don't know for sure, 400 people died in Rhode Island. Okay, between 600 and 700 people died in New England from this storm. Okay, 175 of those people were along that south shore. And you go down there now and you look at something like Roy Carpenter's Beach in Matunic. I mean, if any storm hits that, it's gone. I mean, it's low, right on the water, and it really could easily get just destroyed. One of the most serious places that it hit was down in the area of Misquamicut, near Westerly. And Napatree Point down there had approximately 20, 30 houses on it before the storm, and none afterwards. It just totally was swept clean, and it's still swept clean, by the way. Nobody rebuilt down there. Some of the people that lived on Napatree Point found themselves holding on to the roof of their house and floating over to Connecticut. They actually wrote it out. But again, the winds were in the vicinity of 120 to 150 miles an hour. I just can't, that's hard to imagine, really. We've had some bad storms, but not anything like that. Again, Narragansett Bay and the Sakonnet River are funnels. When the storm surge comes into the bay, Narragansett Bay is a little better protected down at the southern end of it, but it's still, when it gets into the bay, you have this big storm surge that comes along. If you ever go down to Island Park and you stop by the beach there and look down toward the mouth, or the end of the Sakonnet River. Sakonnet River isn't a river, by the way, it's a tidal estuary. It's been called a river forever. But anyway, if you look down to the south end toward Little Compton, it's wide open. You're looking right at the Atlantic Ocean. There's no protection there. And that made Island Park very vulnerable. Because a storm surge, first of all, one came up the Narragansett Bay and hit Providence, a 17-foot wall of water, okay, big chunk of water. There was no hurricane barrier then, okay? So it just surged right into downtown Providence, and you can look at some of the books and things over there. It 17 feet, and there's some buildings in Providence where there's a plaque up there, it's the height of the water. And it was over car rooftops, it was over trolley rooftops, and again, a number of people died in Providence. Newport Harbor was also a disaster area. Again, Thames Street and the wharf area is very low. And so any water surge that comes into the bay obviously floods that area tremendously. The damage on Bellevue Avenue, obviously Bellevue Avenue is up on a rise above the water surge, but the damage there was due mainly to trees and huge trees that had been planted 50, 60 years before were uprooted. In downtown Newport, the the First Baptist Church lost its steeple. That church is right there at the corner of Turo and Spring Street. The steeple was blown off. In Island Park, a 12-foot wall of water came up the Sakonnet River, and the damage, it just took away houses. 19 people died in Island Park. Most of them were summer residents. Most of them had addresses like Fall River or Taunton or places like that. They came down to Island Park with summer houses. And that was how Island Park really got started, as a summer colony. Some of those houses ended up in a Hathaway peach orchard, which is across modern times, across Route 24. Okay, all the way from the beach, the Island Park beach, all the way up past where the dump used to be, and across the road, across Anthony Road, into the peach orchard. Okay. So all of the communities along Narragansett Bay flooded. Again, this wasn't a storm that just sort of stirred up the water a little bit. It was a storm that had several surges that came along, very high surges, and we all, I hope, know the power of water. It's just incredible. Just try lifting up a 5-gallon can of water sometime. It's really heavy. And so water is really destructive when it's churned up by 100, 120 mile an hour winds. 2 ferries, the Governor Carr and I forget what which other one was, but 2 ferries decided they would get underway.
Hamilton.
What was it? Hamilton? Okay, the Hamilton. They got underway because they felt they were safer out in the bay than tied up to a wharf. That didn't work very well. They both went aground over on Jamestown. Again, the sideboard, the freeboard area of a ferry isn't something that's going to resist wind very much. It's going to really blow it around. The Governor Carr, they took a couple of months before they were able to float it back into Narragansett Bay, and it continued to run as a ferry. We used to have ferries to Jamestown, I think. Some of you probably remember that. Okay. So Scotty's book has a lot of personal experiences of people, testimony from people, and so on, and it's really, really well worth reading, by the way. I met her. She died a couple of years ago, relatively young, but she did this book in 2003. The amazing thing about the 38 hurricane was it was going so fast that it blew past here and kept on going and ended up in Vermont someplace where it really died out. Usually the land slows it down. When it hits land, it runs into resistance, and therefore it slows down. This one didn't much. Okay? So the storm hit this area about 3:30 in the afternoon, and by 8 o'clock at night it was gone. And it was quiet. Of course, there was a rather significant path of destruction. Telephone service, electric service, and so on were all out, and a lot of roads were not passable. 433 people died in Rhode Island alone. Okay. And the reason for most of that was lack of warning. Not really, and in some cases, not believing the warning that they got. And of course, we experience that all the time. A storm's coming, let's get down to the beach and see what it looks like. Yeah, we do that all the time. Well, that happened, and rather tragically in several cases here. I'll cite one particular example of a tragedy that took place in Jamestown. Most of you probably are familiar with Mackerel Cove, and Mackerel Cove kind of joins the northern and the southern part of Jamestown together, and it's a very narrow sandbar almost. And there's Sheffield Pond to the north of it, and then the open ocean to the south of it. A car was going down there, a woman and her child, to see what's going on with the storm, and they stalled on that. Behind them was a school bus, and the school bus had 7 children on it. The school bus was forced to get out of her way and got stuck. And so what happened was that some of the children were the children of Carl Chellis, who was the lighthouse keeper at Beavertail. There were 2 Chellis children on the bus. There were 2 others from another family named Giannitas, and there were 4 children from 3 children from a Matos family, and the driver, Norman Caswell. The bus got stuck. Big storm surge came, and it was disabled. the bus driver decided that the safest thing to do was to get the children out and get them to shore. Now, there are the ages of these children: 5, 6, 7, 10, 10, 7, and 11. In the face of a hurricane, a big surge, and in a school bus. So they got out. 2 of them, an 11-year-old named Clayton Chellis, survived. He more or less body surfed about 2 miles up alongside Jamestown and came ashore. The bus driver survived, barely. All the others were killed. And the father of the Matos family was on shore at Fox Hill Farm, and he saw all this happen. 3 of his children died. Grim story. The Chellises had an older brother. The Chellis children had an older brother, Bill. He went to Rogers and took the ferry across to Jamestown. And as he was waiting for the school bus to come and pick him up, a friend came along and said, "Come on, we're going to go check out the storm." So he got in the car with a friend and did not take the school bus. He was 16. He survived. Otherwise, he would have been on that school bus. Now, I tell this story at some length because Tuesday night we had at the lecture I gave Richard Chellis, who's the younger brother of the Chellis family. And he wasn't born in 38, he was born in 42, but obviously he knew the whole story of the family and what had happened. One of the real ironies of the whole story was that his brother Clayton, who survived this storm, joined the Navy and was swimming over on Saipan near the end of World War II and was swept out with an undercurrent and drowned. But his older brother, Bill, who missed the school bus, he said with great pride, lived 86 more years, or 86 years altogether, and died just a couple of years ago. Was in the Navy for 30 years. Anyway, that's just one example of human interest stories. By the way, the woman and the child who stopped the school bus, interfered, they died too. But I mean, it was just, you can look at the newspapers over there, and it's just casualty lists and casualty lists, I mean, all over the place. It's really a grim story. Okay, this is what I just said here. A little more emphasis. So the 38 hurricane was the worst ever to affect New England. And then it became time to clean up, which was a huge, massive project. Scotty says that the cost of the hurricane was $4.7 billion in today's dollars. 20,000 buildings were wrecked, 93,000 families suffered serious property loss. And again, about 600 people or so died. Some never accounted for. Some of those children who were on that school bus, by the way, they found some of them 7, 8 days later. So what we have here coming up on the slides are a few photographs that were taken during the 1938 hurricane. As far as I can determine, the group were given to me. I have a whole album of hurricane pictures over there, by the way. But these were given to me by a friend, and I think they were taken by William King Covell. King Covell was a very good photographer. He lived on the King Covell house on Washington Street. And in some of these pictures, you can see he was taking them from his porch, which overlooked Narragansett Bay. And then also I've been given a collection of photographs by Edith Richardson, who took photographs mostly of the aftermath and probably a day or two after to see some of the damage. So that's what we're going to look at now. We're finally getting to the pictures. Okay, this is during the storm. You have Elm Street Pier here down off Washington Street. And then you have from Battery Park looking north toward the Naval War College. Again, you can see the power of that surf. It's really scary. Newport Beach, again, very exposed, was a shambles. And Thames Street was flooded. This is Thames at Mary Street. Okay. What's amazing in some of these pictures, you'll see there are a lot of cars. Like people didn't really get their cars out of the way. They didn't have enough warning. This is Island Park. Come around here just a little. This is the railroad bridge is over here. And this is the embankment on the railroad bridge. And again, a boat and all kinds of trash there. And some houses from the hummocks, what's left of them, right there. And then this is in Island Park as well. Again, it's incomprehensible the amount of damage that this storm did. These were after the storm, obviously. I think we have someone here who recognizes that first one. She lived there. The Newport waterfront, you have the Armory in the background there. And again, the waterfront was just a shambles. And then we have the monument of the chimney at Third Beach, which is still there. Okay. Again, the water surge up the Sakonnet River was enormous, and it went everywhere. Pardon?
What was the chimney?
Yeah, it was the beach club. It's right by Peabody's Beach there, right in that area. This is the Baptist Church. The building here, this is the Colony House, and the church is right there. The bus terminal was right next to it, and that's where the steeple fell. It fell in the front yard of the church. And then we had the rotunda from Easton's Beach, which, as you can see, needed to be rebuilt. This is a view from Bailey's Beach, the top picture here, looking inland from Bailey's Beach. And much of what you see in the picture are what's left of Bailey's Beach. It was destroyed. And they had a brick building that got moved out across the road, across Ocean Drive. Okay. The bottom photograph is Long Wharf, and you see a boat up on the wharf there. Okay. This is some cars that were in the moat across the street, across the road from Easton's Beach. The bottom picture needs no explanation. I think you can figure out what that is. That's at Easton's Beach as well. So that's what it looked like. Now, Hurricane Carol, August 31st, 1954. This was one of the worst hurricanes that hit New England. In 1954 dollars, it was $460 million worth of damage. Again, that probably equates to at least $7 or $8 billion today. And 150,000 people were left without electricity and phone service. 12,000 homes plus were damaged, a lot of them totally destroyed. There were only one's too many, but only 65 deaths in 1954, primarily because we had an early warning. We knew that was coming, and also we had the experience on the part of those people about the 38 hurricane and what it had done. The Weather Bureau began to name storms in 1953, and Hurricane Carol this was just the second year they were naming them. And what the Weather Bureau has done since is when they have a storm that is very, very destructive, and most of them are, they retire the names. There hasn't been a Hurricane Carol since. Same thing is, I'm sure, true with Katrina, Andrew, and a few others, as far as names go. So Carol also weakened along the eastern seaboard, and they expected it was going to go out to sea. They seem to say that every time. I don't know. There's always a high pressure system over Pennsylvania or New Jersey or something that's going to push these storms out. But it made landfall on eastern Long Island, out at the tip of Long Island, on the 31st, with wind gusts of 125 miles an hour. It crossed Long Island Sound and hit right near New London at Old Saybrook. That was the center of the storm, and that put Rhode Island once more in the dangerous semicircle of this storm. The difference between being in the dangerous semicircle and the other semicircle is very, very significant in terms of wind power, in terms of damage. You get damage in the other semicircle as well, but nothing like you get in the dangerous semicircle. We had wind gusts in this case on Block Island of 135 miles an hour, over 100 miles inland, 100 miles an hour inland. And actually this storm, when it got to the Blue Hills up in near Boston, it broke all the wind gauge equipment at 183 miles an hour. It moved about 35 miles an hour over land. It also came at high tide. But again, we were prepared better. A lot of people had a heads up about what to expect. Plus, Carol struck the Rhode Island coast around 11 o'clock in the morning. And so it wasn't there was more daylight that they had to work with. The 38 hurricane had hit about 3 o'clock, 3:30, and it got dark at 7 o'clock, so they didn't have much time to really do a whole lot there. But this was earlier in the morning, so it was a little bit better that way. 85% of Rhode Island's homes lost electrical power. Obviously, the phone service was significantly interrupted as well. And there was a storm surge again up Narragansett Bay and up the Sakonnet River. Downtown Providence got hit again. They still kept talking about building hurricane barriers, but they hadn't done it yet. Okay. Again, Island Park was devastated by a surge up the Sakonnet River. 30 houses were destroyed and another 120 damaged. Obviously, up on the hill in this part of Portsmouth, there's not as much damage. There's wind damage, there's tree damage, but we don't have the vulnerability that Island Park has, being so close to the water. So after the 38 hurricane, they had been talking about building hurricane barriers in Providence, and they hadn't built it, but now they said maybe we should, after the 1954 hurricane. And they did. I think the hurricane barrier opened, I think it was 1958, okay, which is a really useful thing to protect downtown Providence. When they close the hurricane barrier there, it stops the storm surge from getting into downtown Providence. And it has proven effective on numerous occasions when we've had bad storms since. The beach areas of South County, again, were devastated by this. One of the things that has happened, and is still happening today, is that people are so anxious to get a water view that they sometimes build their houses on very vulnerable positions. We've gotten closer and closer to the water. If you look down over the hill in Portsmouth here, off the East Main Road, there are a lot of really big, expensive houses built fairly close to the water. Everybody wants a good water view. Pay extra taxes for that, but you get your water view. But in some cases, and look at Island Park, some of those houses there are hanging over the water. Okay. And again, this is a problem that we have and have had with some of our recent storms. Okay, again, heavy winds, lots of rain. The waterfront of Newport was devastated. The police station at Market Square had 5 feet of water in it. The Navy ships, we didn't have any destroyer piers in those days. The Navy ships were moored out in the bay. And as I've heard tonight, that usually they were nested. That is, they'd put 3 or 4 destroyers together, but they broke them out and had them moor individually to buoys out in the bay. I had that experience in, I think it was 1962 or 3, when we had a bad storm come through, and the ship I was on went out and tied up to a mooring buoy. That's a hard phrase to say. The beaches at Newport, especially the ritzy beaches, Bailey's, Hazards, and so on, were really devastated by this storm, and Third Beach as well. Island Park was a shambles. It really was a disaster area, and houses were floated across Park Avenue. In a couple of cases, houses were floated into the middle of Park Avenue. One story that I heard was from Dan Cashman, whose father owned Cashman's Park, which was the Island Park Amusement Park. And he said that he was coming home from school, and his family had taken all their furniture and everything up to the second floor of the house. And then when they got down there, they found that all that was there was the foundation. The house was a couple hundred yards away, intact, and the furniture was still okay up on the second floor. Good. But the story of the Boudreaux family is really a fascinating one. They had a summer cottage in Common Fence Point. And for whatever reason, they came down to secure it. They lived either in Fall River or Taunton, I'm not sure, but up that way. And they came down, the mother and two children, they were sort of, I think they were teenage children, came down to sort of make sure everything was okay at the cottage that they had down there. And as they got there, it became flooded. And eventually it floated out into Narragansett Bay. They found a piece of roof to hold on to, and they floated out into the bay with the wind blowing from the south, moved them up in the direction of Ocean Grove, up above Fall River. Then the wind shifted, and the wind blew them down under the Mount Hope Bridge. And then they were seen struggling out there by a Navy destroyer. And the destroyer cut loose and went to rescue them, got the two children on board, and the mother disappeared. Then she surfaced on the other side of the ship. She had gone under the ship, and they rescued her. They all were safe. What an experience that must have been. Anyway, they were rescued, but quite a ride. Imagine in a hurricane on the top of a roof out in the middle of Narragansett Bay. Anyway, Hurricane Carol again was east of the 38 hurricane, and it did a lot of damage on Cape Cod, where approximately 20,000 people had been evacuated. Again, it was not high season. Well, it's just about high, it's still high season, late in high season, August 31st. And Cape Cod got hit really hard by Hurricane Carol. It went on and hit Boston. In Boston, the steeple of the Old North Church, where Paul Revere had allegedly gotten his signal that the British were coming, that steeple was blown down and later rebuilt. It blew out over Canada. Think about this, over Canada that same night, the same night that it hit Long Island. Okay, that's a fast-moving storm, but a swath of tremendous damage. And what's really weird about all of this is that in both cases of these two storms, the next day was a really beautiful day. You know, what happened yesterday? You know, it's just really amazing how quickly it was over. And then, of course, you look around. The Stone Bridge, which was one of two bridge routes off the island. The Stone Bridge was the only route off the island, other than ferries, from 1795 to 1929. Think about that. All the traffic going on and off Quidnick Island went off on the Stone Bridge, except for the ferries. Obviously, the ferries carried cars as well, as we all know. But the Stone Bridge was really vulnerable. If you ever see, there's one picture in John Pierce's book about Portsmouth, taken from the hummocks, and it shows you the Stone Bridge out in the middle of nothing. It was so vulnerable. There were at least 7 bridges built in that area. One, there's a wicked rip tide through there. If you ever tried to go through that on a sailboat, through the abutments for the bridge, it's really hard to do. And also the fact that it's just exposed. So there have been numerous stone bridges. The one that was here in the 54 hurricane had been built in 1912. And it was what's called a double lift bridge. It opened this way, and it opened for any boat that wanted to go through there, sailboats and so on. They would stop, open the bridge for them. Anyway, it was pretty vulnerable during this storm as well from the storm surge that came up the Sakonnet River. But it was closed for a couple of months afterwards, but they patched it together and put it back in service. It was a temporary patch because at that time they were building the Sakonnet River Bridge. That beautiful Sakonnet River Bridge that still sits there rusting away. The cost of building that bridge in 1956 when it opened was $9 million. The cost of its replacement, and I know there's inflation, but $180 million and a 10-cent toll. Okay. Anyway, the pilings were in for the new Sakonnet Bridge in 1954, and again, there was all kinds of boats and lumber and everything just piled up against it. It was a mess. So they did open the new Sakonnet River Bridge in September of 1956. Tiverton had a lot of damage during this storm because, again, the low-lying areas like Riverside Drive, where the Humphreys building is over there and so on, that was all underwater. And the bridge that goes over to Nanaquacket was knocked off, it went away. Okay. And Sakonnet Point was pretty much swept clean, as it has been more than once. Okay. So, the aftermath of Hurricane Carol. Martial law was declared by Governor Dennis Roberts in Rhode Island. The National Guard was called out in Massachusetts. There was a lot of looting that went on in both places. They brought in workers from a lot of other states to help with the repairs. I had the experience last year when Hurricane Sandy was on its way. I was over in Warwick I forget what it was for, postcard show or something. And I looked in the parking lot, and there were approximately 40 trucks, all with the same markings on the side. And I drove over just to sort of see what it was, and they were all repair crews. And they all had on the side of their truck, I can't remember the town, but it was in Illinois. They bring them in from all over for these storms. It's really amazing. So the workers came, a lot of trees. What was it? I think there was a number that was, of the lumber that was down in the 54 hurricane, they could have built 250,000 houses. Okay. Power was restored many days later, and the state of emergency continued for a while, and Rhode Island and Massachusetts were declared a federal disaster area by President Eisenhower. Meanwhile, however, another tropical storm comes along. Keep in mind, Carol is the 31st of August. This storm was formed on September 2nd, and it headed north from the Caribbean. It came to be known as Hurricane Edna. And Hurricane Edna also hit Long Island and Rhode Island. But it was centered a good bit, east of the center of Hurricane Carol. Its center was down in the vicinity of the Cape. And so the Cape was really devastated a lot. Again, with winds of 110 to 125 miles an hour. And what Rhode Island experienced, again, was heavy winds, not quite severe as they had been in other storms. And again, this is 10 days after the Hurricane Carol. Okay, but Rhode Island got a lot of rain, 5 to 8 inches of rain in a very short period of time. More damage from Edna took place as the storm blew further north and went inland in Maine. So what we have here is another series of photographs taken. These are all taken in the aftermath of Hurricane Carol. Most of them are in Newport. But again, you get an idea of just how destructive these storms were. Okay, Long Wharf and Washington Square. You see the Historical Society building on the left. You see no Long Wharf, it's all water. And Thames Street. The water went up about to the movie theater, the first movie theater on Truro Street. Okay. When I was given these photographs, I was given 125 of them. And there's just an amazing collection of stuff. This is Government Landing. You see one of the steamboats out in the harbor there behind. The water isn't all that deep right here. You can tell from that car on the left-hand side. And then you have the Newport Yacht Club with a boat in its backyard there. Again, this picture was taken from Long Wharf. This is Long Wharf also. This is in the vicinity of Parati Park, right in the corner there. And again, you have a fishing boat on its side and a lot of lumber. Bellevue Avenue, again, mostly tree damage, but big trees. Very big trees. A couple of cars in the moat. Yes? Pardon?
I was in that car.
This car? Tell us about it. Okay, after, when questions. I'd like you to say something about it. Okay, the moat right across from Easton's Beach, and also Newport Casino, which lost most of its roof. Newport Beach, obviously they've built the bathhouses up on cement pilings now, and that probably will protect the cement pilings, but it probably won't protect the bathhouses. Okay, if we get a surge through there and wind. And then we have Paradise Lunch on Thames Street there. Church Street, right next to Trinity. You can see the Trinity Cemetery on the left of this picture. Big tree down, a lot of tree damage. This is Mary Street, the John Clark School there. Again, no water damage here, but because it's up the hill, but a lot of tree damage. So, the conclusion to all of this, and I hope you have some questions and comments when we get this done. Will it happen again? Of course it will, and it has. We know that. Will we be better prepared? We'll be better forewarned, but I'm not sure we'll be better prepared. We don't believe it generally, except when we have to get to the store and get our batteries. Don't have batteries, you're in trouble. Again, more homes have been built closer to the water. We do have a much more sophisticated weather bureau, which gives us good warning and so on, and all those meteorologists who love to stand out there and get doused by the waves. But if we lose power, how are we going to watch the Weather Channel, and how are we going to charge our cell phones, other than we can do it in our car? Well, that's okay, but if the car is still there, if the roof hasn't blown off the garage. But anyway, so we do have a lot of problems this time of year, and knock on wood, we've been really lucky this year so far. I mean, we're in prime hurricane season right now. There doesn't seem to be any indication, but that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. The hurricane season has lasted longer in recent years, and that's been part of the problem. But in conclusion, one thing is really reasonably certain in all of this situation: nature wins. That's Long Wharf during the storm, during the 38 hurricane. Okay. I mean, it's just, look at all the cars. The cars are floating like the boats are. Anyway, that's the presentation. There's a lot of show and tell stuff up here on the table. I hope you'll take a look at some of it. I'd be happy to take questions if I can answer them. And I'm happy to take testimonies too, because I know there's quite a few of you here who remember some of these hurricanes. Yes?
How high is the hurricane barrier in the province?
That's a good question. Anybody know? It's 20, 25 feet at least. Yeah, it has stopped every storm since they built it. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
New York City called on Providence. New York City, after Sandy, called on Providence, talking to them about their hurricane barrier.
Uh-huh.
I think they learned from the Dutch. They had Dutch engineers come and help them build it.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Interesting. Didn't know that. Other questions? Anybody? Yes, I'm sorry, Bobby.
During the 38 hurricane, do we know how many people died in Portsmouth?
19 Island Park. I think that's all.
There was a story that
It was 18 or 19. The 19th was found a couple of months later. But anyway.
along West Main, actually Bristol Ferry, there was a story that the house next to the old Van Hoff house had a mother and two children, and two children stepped out, and in she getting them, she was killed. But
That could be. I don't know.
that's why I'm wondering if you think they were all Island Park.
As far as I know, they were, but it's hard to tell. Again, people disappeared, and we don't know for what reason. That's entirely possible that there were others. Yeah. Any other quick questions? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Take a look at all this stuff up here. Appreciate it.
On Tuckman Avenue, My future wife lived in Renfrew Park, and we were on the Esplanade too.
Yep.
And immigrants really from Italy, my family was able to have a house on Tuckerman Avenue.
What do you think would happen if there was a storm surge that went up Narragansett Bay and bounced off the hurricane barrier? Would it go over to Edgewood?
We got out of the car, and then he said, the radio. So after the water went back, I went to turn the radio off. And then we got across the street, swept into the moat. It was a 54 brand new Pontiac station wagon. And we climbed up the hill. And just in time to stop, my brother-in-law was really, was kind of early. And then we went all the way through Green End Avenue and got home. And then the rest of it was just getting people out of the houses on the Esplanade and bringing them to my future in-laws' house in Renfrew Park.